When we decided to do this event, I knew that I had to get Dr. Russell Surasky on here because he has been a loud voice and a very clear voice across the US. If you're from Australia, if you're from the UK or New Zealand, you've got to go and follow him and see what he's doing. He's speaking on a range of topics, but again, Dr. Russell Surasky, he's a triple board certified neurologist in the United States. You're going to see him on news channels, speaking and debating. But I just want to quickly shine a light on what it actually takes for someone like him who has clearly studied for a long, long time, putting everything on the line to speak the truth. Can you just, again, imagine what that is like, where him just identifying basic truths, asking great questions, and wanting to share information with you results in attacks and of course a lot of criticism and adversity. I know a lot of people have faced that during this time, but again, it's people like Dr. Russell Surasky that have led the way and really inspired a lot of people. So without further ado, I want to welcome the doctor to the Global Freedom Rally.
Andy, my man, it's so nice to finally get this to happen. It's been months in the making. Thank you so much. It's so awesome to be here.
Mate, it absolutely has. And I had to have you on. I've been watching your stuff for so long. Every time I see you on the news or Fox News or whatever it is, I just think, thank you. Just thank God there is a doctor of your caliber, a human at your level in what you do, that is speaking the truth and has the guts to go out there and fight the good fight. So, mate, I want to say a huge thank you. And I'm going to ask you a few questions at the end about all of that because there's a lot to go into. But again, from me to you, a huge thank you. And again, I know you're going to inspire everyone with your talk.
No, and also thank you so much for giving me this global stage. It's not often, whether I'm on Fox or Newsmax, it's not always a global stage. You know, it's certainly an American stage. And I also want to reverberate the praise you were giving to Bobby before. He's definitely one of the top 5 accounts I watch every day. A lot of people think he's just a funny guy, but I think he's become, quite philosophical, and he's given tremendous value in his content. So huge fan. I love what you're doing, what he's doing. So far, your lineup's awesome, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So thanks so much for having me. But I know there's a lot to get to. You can see me and hear me fine, correct?
Absolutely. Take it away, my friend.
Okay, great. Well, look, my fellow citizens, not just American citizens, it looks like things have really changed. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Russell Surasky, and I'm a board-certified neurologist. I did all my training here in the U.S., in fact, all in New York. And it's truly my honor to have the opportunity to speak with everyone tonight. In fact, at this very moment, I'm about to go into a hearing with the hospital where I spent more than a decade of my medical training, because they are now seeking to strip me of my hospital privileges because I won't bend to the tyrannical vaccine mandates. This is the same hospital where I spent 100-hour shifts for years as a neurology resident, learning to save lives, where I helped provide urgent, life-saving treatments, reopening blood clots to people's brains so they wouldn't be brain dead or paralyzed from strokes. This is the same hospital system who helped me become the physician I am today, but now won't even let me step foot into their facilities because I won't take the shot. A shot which for me only presents risk with no benefits. But this is not just about doctors, clearly, or frontline workers. It's about all of us. And time is of the essence because those who wish to do us harm are moving faster than we all realize. And make no mistake, we are at war. And this is a war to protect our God-given liberties against the government tyranny. And it's a battle against good and evil because countless people before us have fought and died for the freedoms that we have. And all of us have an absolute obligation to protect those freedoms. And for the last 2 years, governments in the US and abroad, with the help of the media, have used fear-mongering at the highest level so they could impose mask mandates, lockdowns, forced vaccinations. They use fear so they can strip human beings of our most basic God-given liberties. And the suffering and the death that were caused from the lockdowns far surpassed any harm that COVID could have ever caused. Drug abuse. I saw these things firsthand because I didn't miss a day in practice. Domestic violence, missed medical care. Common sense told us this was happening, but all the stats coming out now prove it. It's showing just how many more lives the government killed than COVID ever could have. Even missed medical care alone. Do you know that 50% of people missed their cancer screenings during the lockdowns? Half of them never got their cancer treatments. Those cancers aren't going anywhere. They're just going to get detected later now in more advanced forms. In fact, organs weren't even transplanted during those absurd COVID restrictions. And because of that, thousands more died. The lockdowns caused over 100,000 drug overdose deaths in just 1 year. That's more than any other time in our history. And worst of all is what the government did to our children. The last 2 years, we've seen skyrocketing rates of depression and anxiety, suicide in children, adolescents and teenagers. The social isolation that resulted from these lockdowns prevented millions of children from normal interaction with their friends and even their relatives. Children and adolescents, the people at the lowest risk of COVID, became the ones who experienced and continue to experience the worst effects from the government. So the bottom line, the lockdowns imposed by the government caused way more suffering and death than COVID ever possibly could have. And there are still many of us out there who think, well, maybe we got lockdowns wrong, but they're mostly over in the US, that is. But masks aren't so bad. Let's just leave the masks. Maybe they'll help. They still think putting a thin piece of fabric, forcing a thin piece of fabric over our faces is saving lives. Yet study after study has shown us conclusively that these cloth masks allow 97% of droplets to go right through them. They're absolutely useless. And yet, here the mandates continue. This is what we call cognitive dissonance. They give a false sense of security to adults at the expense of children. What a sad state of affairs we're in. We literally have evidence from states like Florida, where one county that's enforcing mask mandates has worse outcomes than the neighboring county that doesn't enforce masks. That's direct evidence, yet the charade continues. In fact, we have a study now that shows 50,000 children. 85% of them need remedial language training because of these masks. You think maybe that would give teachers pause, but no. It takes a governor in Florida to literally have to take away teachers' salaries to get them to stop with the mask mandates. My God. So lockdowns, masks, and I like to say just a few words about forced vaccines. Obviously, it's not easy to try and say just a few words on this topic, but I'm literally actually going to be walking to a hearing of my own to protect my own hospital privileges, to continue to treat patients who are sick with neurological illnesses. They're trying to stop me from doing that. So I'll actually try to keep this quick and get right to the point. The government, our government here in the US and your governments abroad, continue to stoke unrest by calling this a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And they know it isn't true. That slogan, which has since been retracted, like most every other government slogan about COVID, was designed simply to pit us against one another, hoping to create some kind of social pressure to create mass vaccinations. It didn't work. The numbers actually went down after President Biden made that speech. And I want to tell you guys something very critical about these vaccines that most people are not aware of. By just 3 to 4 months out now, maybe you saw this in the news, it's no longer possible to detect the difference between someone who is vaccinated for someone who isn't with regard to their protection. Is our government really going to try and convince the American public that everyone needs a booster every few months to protect against the virus that for most people is little more than a cold, that has a 99.9% full recovery rate, and that has a massive natural population immunity? Unlike the short-term protection from the vaccines, we have over 15 studies showing that natural immunity is far more powerful and durable and broad. The vaccines, quite frankly, are much less effective than was initially believed. So the idea, guys, that it's going to be possible for countries to force vaccinate their way out of this pandemic is nonsense. The only way this is going to get better is by enough people getting natural immunity, which is the same way we've always gotten out of respiratory virus pandemics. Okay, while we can do that while protecting people with multiple comorbidities and the elderly, like every other virus. And children should absolutely not get vaccinated because the risks do not outweigh the benefits. The government won't advertise this statistic, but you know that not one American has ever died under the age of 18 from COVID. Not one. They claim there were some that died with COVID, but we all know that's a blatant manipulation of words because dying with COVID is not the same as from. And you know that even if a child has a severe underlying comorbidity, like leukemia, their odds of getting very sick from COVID is still 1 in 250,000. So you tell me, how in the world the risks of a vaccine make it worth it for a child between the ages of 5 and 11 to get this vaccine? Now, this study that Pfizer is using to claim that the vaccine is safe for children only has 2,000 kids. And what a ridiculous joke this is, guys. It's amazing that Pfizer's even getting away with this. 2,000 kids. Let's put this in perspective. The adult study had 40,000. Polio, 1 million people in the study. Now, let's look at this even closer. Pfizer just got done basically apologizing the fact that they overestimated the dosage in adolescents, which is why we're seeing myocarditis in 1 in 5,000 boys after the second shot, right? So 1 in 5,000. Now we have kids 5 to 11 years old, but the study only has 2,000 kids. How can we even pick up myocarditis if it's 1 in 5,000, right? What about other rare side effects that this vaccine might cause in 5 to 11 years old? How could we possibly pick those up if the study just has 2,000 children? So now the FDA, based on this study of 2,000 kids, is saying, oh, it's safe, and they're approving it for millions of children in the U.S. This is the height of lunacy, and this is literally a giant experiment on our nation's children and the world's children. And let's even take this a step further. The CDC just acknowledged this week that over 50% of our nation's children have already had COVID. More than half. That means more than half of kids 5 to 11 already have natural immunity, already have it. So what does that mean? How does that change the equation? You want to know something else? Deep within the 80-page Pfizer report, you guys go look at page 80. It says that in their study of 2,000 kids, of the kids that actually had gotten COVID naturally, not a single one got COVID again in the study. Not one. Oh, it's buried on page 80. You go see. So if you just blatantly give a vaccine to kids that have no risk of COVID anyway, over half of which already had it, what's the benefit risk ratio here in kids? So you might ask yourself, right? This is science. It's available, right? Why would Pfizer say that this is conclusive evidence that the benefit outweighs the risk? And why would the FDA go and approve it? Well, could it be that something that Pfizer made 50 billion with a B alone on vaccine mandates for adults? And now what do you think they're going to make if the millions of children are now mandated to get this vaccine? Right now they say, oh, they won't be mandated. In a few months, as soon as it's approved, you already see the mayors of our cities saying, oh, it's going to be mandated. You know, that's what they do. It's obvious that the FDA has intentionally been slow walking therapeutics because they don't want to divert your attention from their false narrative of vaccination being the only way out of the pandemic. For example, Pfizer has an oral antiviral called ritonavir, cuts hospitalizations and deaths by 90%, 90, in people with a lot of comorbidities. It's just sitting on shelves. Molnupiravir, another one, 100% effective at preventing deaths, sitting on shelves waiting for the FDA to give it EUA approval. Why is it sitting on shelves? Yet, what do we see? The FDA is fast-tracking all these vaccines for little kids that have no risk of COVID whatsoever, while therapeutics sit on shelves. What's the motivation there, guys? Come on. It's not that hard to figure it out. So let's talk reality. Let's get to the nitty gritty. It was never the goal to eradicate COVID-19. It's not possible. And all the scientists and epidemiologists always knew. They pretended elimination was possible so they could keep moving the goalposts and showing case counts to keep massive social control going. But guys, there will always be a baseline number of COVID cases and hospitalizations, just like the flu and the common cold. COVID will ebb and flow with seasonality. We will be living with this virus because there is no COVID zero. The solution is what it always should have been: protect the elderly and those with multiple comorbidities. That's what it is with every single illness that affects humanity. The solution lies not with government control, but with individual choice. And this is what Andy and Bobby were just talking about. We must have the ability to individually assess our own risks and benefits. And for our children, mass and vaccination should be available to all, but mandated to none. And our government officials demonstrate repeatedly they want the opposite. They want to take a top-down approach, which means the government is the decision maker, and they want to rob individuals of free choice. And it is so important as citizens of the U.S. and of the world that we stand up for these freedoms and liberties. They're under attack. So practically, what do? Well, each of us as individuals must start taking radical personal responsibility. Start in your own home. What can you fix there? Are you and your family healthy? Are you building your own natural immunity to COVID and other illnesses? Is there something you can be doing about other health issues that put you at a higher risk for complications? The small choices ultimately amount to big changes. You start with yourself, and it's amazing. Look at all the drama around Aaron Rodgers. How many professional athletes have ever died of COVID in any sport, in any country in the last 2 years? Zero. They're the lowest risk people on earth. How about we channel that energy to talk about obesity as the leading risk factor? And fear, guys. Once fear is instilled in your mind, that's how the media gets to take away your freedom. So you got to fight that fear by educating yourself and staying informed. Don't accept by default what you hear on the news. Examine everything you hear and read through your own lens of common sense. It's incredible how often the media just continues to just get everything wrong. It's too coincidental because it's intentional. They have an agenda. Don't be an uninformed lamb being preyed upon by the wolves of the media who just want you sitting in front of the TV selling you advertising time, keeping you in fear. And parents, get in the fight. Your children need you. They're depending on you to protect them. Don't let the true pandemic fear get into your homes and ruin your lives and the lives of your children. Oh, and to healthcare professionals, my message to you: educate yourselves. Look at the official statements from your medical boards. You worked so hard for so long. You spent years to get your degrees and get those analytical skills. Use them for the good of your patients. Act in the best interest of your patients, not for what's political and what's easy. Your citizens are looking to you for help. And, we have to reject the narrative of fear and of the need for government to save us. And we must embrace the anti-narrative, which is really the pursuit of our own excellence. Like Andy Frisella always says, we must stand up for ourselves, and we have to reject the narrative that we are weak, at risk, and in need of the government to save us. And we must implement the discipline and self-sacrifice needed to improve ourselves individually. Always remember that freedom will never be on the wrong side of history. So goodbye and good bless, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you guys so much for having me on tonight. Thank you, Andy. It's greatly and deeply appreciated beyond what you know.
And thank you so much. And clearly, there's so much passion there. Not only passion, but intelligence, thank God. And I've got a few questions that I need to ask you because
Please.
I think out of everyone, you are going to be able to give some great answers. Some are selfish because they're just things that I want to know. Others, I think everybody should hear from you as well. So I hear you mention masks. I hear you mention transmission. and also the jab and the medicine. And again, have you found in your research and your study that both masks and the jab really do not stop transmission? So if you have it or not, you're not affecting anyone else, is my question.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Andy. So, I mean, essentially, what the vaccines are doing is, in most cases, at least for a few months, depending upon which vaccine you have, they may help reduce the risk that you're going to get severely ill or wind up hospitalized or potentially dying. Again, we're talking about those people with multiple medical comorbidities or very elderly. People who are not high risk, these are cold symptoms, guys. So I want to specify that, right? So if you have if you're a high risk individual and you have the vaccine, the benefits for you may outweigh the risk. So that's why I clarify. I'm not anti-vaxxer. Everyone has to assess their own risk benefit ratio. And for some people, the benefit may outweigh the risk. So my point is that, but in terms of transmission, there's certainly no guarantees that you can't contract the virus and spread the virus. And we don't know. It certainly doesn't eliminate it from happening. Does it reduce the transmission somewhat? Maybe. Very hard to quantify and study, but people all over the place. In fact, at least half the people who are hospitalized with COVID in the hospital are reinfected by COVID, and they're vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important to understand. The reason being is that, again, like you, I'm not anti, but what I am anti is turning people on each other. And that's what we're seeing with this divisive language in the media and the narrative from the government, where we are saying that it is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, where we are saying that you are selfish, that you are a bad person, an evil person, if you are hesitant and wanting to find out more information. Again, I just find it mind blowing that this has become the norm globally. What what sort of accountability do you think there will be in the medical industry in regards to how they've pushed this?
I think that there'll be essentially no accountability, Andy, unfortunately. There very rarely is. There are vaccine injury courts where perhaps, some cases get through and the vaccine companies offer some money up, but in terms of the accountability is a drop in the bucket. It never stops them from doing what they're doing. They make billions of dollars in profit, and they set aside a fraction of 1% of money they're going to pay out for injuries, and that's it, and they keep moving.
Mm. Yeah, it's a real shame, and again, that's why I think this is so concerning. When there is no accountability, there is no way of seeking justice. You have to ask the questions why. If that doesn't give you red flags, then I don't know what will. Mate, I want to ask you a question about how close the flu like virus and this really is. Now, I don't know what the actual stats are in the US, but over in Australia, we saw in 2019, 2018, every year on the news, it was an emergency. This flu's worse than every other year. And it ramped up until 2020, where we, of course, got hit with this pandemic. But what we found was that the flu disappeared, literally, and was gone. And some are saying it's because people wash their hands more. I want to know from a triple board certified doctor, what is your point of view on why did it disappear?
All right, it's the $1 million question, Andy, because if you ask 100 doctors, you'll get 100 different answers. Okay, there is evidence that perhaps some of this has to do with seasonality, and perhaps that legitimately there would have been, irregardless of COVID being a factor, that the flu would have had a unusually low prevalence over the past year or so. I think that was just one piece of it. The second piece of it was that our testing was just so selectively inaccurate, both sensitivity and specificity, and what they were looking for. You know, if you had cold symptoms of any kind, everyone was getting tested. And what were they looking for? They were looking for COVID. And how were they looking for COVID? They were using PCR testing that was wildly inaccurate. In fact, you know this, in the US, they're using PCR testing that the cycle thresholds where they were so inaccurate that they were getting 90% false positives. And so they did a study of 3 states in the country, a very well done study published by the New York Times. They redid the test. 90% were false positives when they set the cycle thresholds to normal. That means all those people never had to be quarantined, never were infectious. This went on during the height of the pandemic. I think that they had blinders on. They were looking for certain things. They ignored other things. They were not testing appropriately. So I think it's a multifactorial issue. But what I don't think it is, Andy. So I don't have the clear answer you're looking for, but I think it's multifactorial. And what I don't think it is because people wear masks and they wash their hands. I think that is a easy cop out for people to sort of continue to live in a bubble and neurotic, germophobic world, and to keep people in masks and staying at home. I think that's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, and I agree. I think one of the saddest things to come out of this is fear. It's the fear not only that we've seen in ourselves at times, but the fear that we're passing to kids. And I literally, with my own eyes, have seen kids too scared to go into restaurants and to public areas and touch the door because they have been watching TV so much. I mean, what sort of impact do you think this is going to have on the people and the kids moving forward?
It's actually awful, and a lot of it's not just TV; it's their parents.
Yes.
Their parents' own anxiety and neuroses they put onto their children, and then children become afraid of the air. They think there's something dangerous in the air lurking that's going to come under the
Mm.
door and hurt them at night. I mean, I literally this is imagine being an impressionable 6, 7, 8-year-old kid that you have to wear a mask to be near your peers. How do you process that? A lot of these kids think there's like literally that one kill the other person next to them if they simply move their mask down. It's an absurd environment that we've created for kids, and it needs to end. It needed to end a very long time ago. And unfortunately, it's much more for adults and has nothing to do with children. The children are just getting hurt by it.
Mm. Yeah, I absolutely agree, my friend. And again, we're seeing that everywhere, and it is a real shame. And I just hope that we can learn from what's taken place. I'm seeing a shift. I'm seeing people start to realize what's going on here in Australia, definitely. And I hope. Are you seeing the same in the US?
Yes, I believe I'm optimistic. I think that
Mm.
we're moving forward, albeit not as quickly as I would love it to, but I think that we are making progress. We are moving forward. I actually have a quick question if you have a minute. I'd like to know more about what's going on in Australia. I see the news, I see what's
Mm.
happening right now lockdowns, forced vaccinations. It looks like for every man, woman, and child. Is that literally what it is? Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on today there in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, every state is slightly different, but what we've seen, especially in Victoria, my home state, and Sydney, New South Wales, is we've seen some of the harshest lockdowns in the world. And in Victoria specifically, we have seen some of the harshest lockdowns, restrictions, and forced mandates in the world. So right across the country, we're having valuable nurses, doctors, uh, firemen, police officers, all getting forced out of their jobs. And this is what the protests are about today. Last weekend, we saw about 138,000 people march the streets in Victoria in order to stand up for our rights and really fight for freedom. And to me, that was one of the most powerful things to see because I knew that finally people had come to the point of enough is enough. And we know for every one person that shows up, they represent at least another 10 people that are thinking and feeling the same. And what we have today, Russell, just so you know, in Australia, every state, we've got global freedom rallies happening all over the world. But in Australia, we're set to have the biggest protests probably in our history.
That's phenomenal. Do you guys have avenues? Does the government allow for medical or religious exemptions under any circumstances?
We are meant to, but these are very, very limited, and they are not going through. Everyone is getting denied these, and it's pretty common knowledge. Now we're having doctors have their practices raided by allocated officials from the government, stealing, taking away their personal files, checking if they've been giving exemptions. disbarring them, and so much more. It really has become quite shocking, and I say that without any exaggeration. So this is what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the doctors. We're fighting for freedom. We're fighting for privacy, and there's a lot on the line.
Everything's on the line because what happens here, the government's paying attention, how easy it is to take away our basic liberties. Not, the Constitution is there to protect us from the government. It's not the other way around. So, I know Australia has a constitution that I assume, I don't know it well, but I assume it's there to protect the people.
Yeah, well, look, in saying that, it's not as strong as yours, unfortunately. And, we've got human rights charters in certain areas and certain states, but we have seen blatant disrespect and dismissal of those exact things, all under the state of emergency. Again, under that guise, there are no rules except the new rules. And this is exactly what we need to make sure never happens again. And so, again, it's so important that we speak to individuals like yourself, the senators, and so much more to educate people that it doesn't have to be this way. And in fact, it shouldn't be this way.
100%, Andy. Well, this is incredible what you put together. I'm so excited to. I'm gonna be staying tuned. I'll probably be up for as long, probably at least for another few hours, and then try and tune. So, are you guys gonna go live to the streets?
We are about to go live to the protest in Brisbane, which is going to be phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Andy, for having me on.
Mate, I want to say a big thank you. Again, you've been doing so much good work. You're literally going into another fight right now. And everyone watching, you've got to go and follow Dr. Russell Surasky on Instagram. He is always dropping knowledge bombs, and it's a man that you must follow. Doctor, another big thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll be watching, and I'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon. Thank you. There you have it, guys. Again, we have so much happening. I want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Russell Surasky. Please go and follow him and see what he's up to. He's literally standing in the fire every single bloody day, standing up for the future generations of doctors in order to speak the truth and ask questions. Because if you cannot ask questions in science and in the medical industry, it is no longer science, it is religion. And that is something that we do not need in that field.